a heart that hurts, I want to spend my life mending broken people. I want to spend my life mending broken people. Hello, friends, and welcome to 3ABN. If you are a part of our family, you know who I am, but if you're not, my name is John Lomacang, and I will be your host today for this very inspiring program about missions. Now, normally when you hear the word missions, you think of overseas. Well, missions is not necessarily only overseas. It's something that can happen in your local community as well as thousands of miles away. And today our guest is going to share her story about how missions has not only become a part of her life, but really has become a major function out of which the Lord has inspired her and equipped her to reach into the lives of many people that are around the world, including those who are here in America as well as many continents away. So don't turn away from the program, hit the record button, because I know that the Lord has something to challenge you with today, to inspire you, and to let you know that as a Christian, there's a call on all of our lives. And guess what? Every one of us is called to be a missionary. And if we're not, we are the mission field. Now, before we get into our program, I want to thank you for your prayers and your financial support of this network that continues to go and grow as we believe Jesus is soon to come. We want to do all in our power to get others ready for that great and glorious event. So thank you for your prayers and surely for your financial support. Now, just before we meet our guests, we always have some wonderful music on our program, as you know. And this particular person that's going to minister to us today is Gail Murphy, Gail Jones Murphy. Now, she not only plays the piano well, but she sure does sing well. And she's going to bless us with a song entitled, No, Not One. Thank you so much, Gail, for that wonderful song. No, not one. What a name. The name of Jesus really is the cornerstone of our walk on a day-by-day basis. Thank you so much for that. Well, let's meet our guest at this time, Dr. Ann Hamel. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Dr.
It's good
Hamel.
to be here.
Thank you so much for gracing our studio today with this very important program about missions. You know, there's some people that are tuning in that may say, I know that voice or I know that face. If the voice for radio, the face for television, but there's some people might say, who is Dr. Ann Hamel? So let our audience know who you are, where you're from, and kind of what you do right now, kind of in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, I'm a psychologist.
Okay.
I have a private practice in Berrien Springs near Andrews University, but I work with missionaries. I work with the General Conference and I provide missionary care and crisis intervention for missionaries.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. That's, you know, when you put that together, we think of psychology, but we don't think of it in the context of missions. At least my mind doesn't click in those two arenas. They seem to be so far apart.
Yeah.
But just kind of before we get into that, because we're going to talk about missions and psychology together. But when we think about psychology, missions doesn't automatically jump on the back of that bandwagon. Right. But tell us about your walk in ministry, because you've been now involved in ministry about how many years would you say?
My husband and I went to Africa in 1979.
Wow.
So we, during my senior year in college, we got a call to go to Africa as missionaries.
Wow.
So I at my core, I consider myself a missionary.
Okay.
So it's been a long time.
Wow. And home for you is where?
Berrien Springs.
And married right now with children?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm married to Lauren Hamel. We have 7 children. All but one is married, and we have 7 grandchildren. Wow. 6 grandchildren, sorry.
6 grandchildren. There's a picture of your wonderful family.
Yes.
Wow. That's a lot of future right there. Mostly guys, if I'm looking correctly.
6 boys, 1 girl.
Wow. She's got a lot of protection.
Yeah.
Now, psychologists, you mentioned psychologists, then you also mentioned missions, but we talked about ministry. Tell us your position. You're also working with the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, and there might be somebody watching that might not know what the General Conference is. What is the General Conference?
Okay. The General Conference is the
world headquarters.
World headquarters for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And is responsible for the church around the world, and it sends missionaries.
And you know, I'm a pastor also, so that comes into play. I'm a part of the General Conference, you're a part of the General Conference, but you work at the General Conference.
Yes, I do.
As well as your practice in Berrien Springs, Michigan. I want to go back into your early years of, since missions is the major focus of our program, what college did you attend in your preparatory stages for mission, or at least when missions became a very active part of your life?
I went to Southern Adventist University. I did a degree in elementary education. When I went to Southern, at first, I wanted to become a psychiatrist. And I remember telling people that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And their response was, why would you want to do that? I thought you were a Christian. So the split between religion and psychology was very much evident at that time. And I was a Christian, and I wanted to serve the Lord with my life. So I changed majors. I got a degree in education.
Okay.
I married after my sophomore year. And during my senior year in college, we had a call to go to Africa. We left the States on our 2nd wedding anniversary, and we flew to Belgium, where we spent a month studying French before we traveled on to Bujumbura, Burundi, where we spent the next 3 years of our lives.
Wow. So you speak some French also?
I speak French.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the place that you were called to in Africa, Was it directly in Rwanda immediately, or?
No, we went to Burundi first. Burundi is the sister country to Rwanda. It's just south of Rwanda. Same people groups. They speak very similar languages. One speaks Kirundi, the other speaks Kinyarwanda. They're as different as British and American English.
Wow.
So the same people groups. After we spent 3 years in Burundi, we were asked to move to Rwanda because at that time the General Conference had decided to build a university in Africa to serve French-speaking students of Africa and the Indian Ocean. And we moved there and were a part of building that institution.
Okay. Now, when a person thinks about going to the mission field, okay, here you are in college in America, what kind of psychological change, I mean, the mindset you're thinking, well, you know, I'm going to a foreign country, I'm preparing myself to learn a foreign language, I'm going to be in a foreign field. How does that pan out? I mean, when we think about going on vacation, let me do some comparisons. We think, okay, got to pick clothing, what am I going to enjoy there? But when you think about missions, there's more of a permanence to that than just a 2-week vacation or a 1-month furlough somewhere.
Well, let me back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
I was born into a home where my dad was Catholic, my mom was Adventist. And so very early in life, I developed a very personal relationship with God. I didn't know which one of my parents was right. And I remember asking the Lord, how do I know how to find you? How do I know which way is right? And I have a memory of being very young and the Lord saying to me, and it wasn't an audible voice, but it was a very real voice. He said, I will show you the way. So I put my hand in his, and I have allowed God to show me his way in my life since that time. And as a young girl, I remember seeing the lives of the nuns and admiring their lives of sacrifice and commitment to the Lord. But when I was 14, I became an Adventist, and Adventists don't have nuns.
That's right.
But when we received our call to go to Africa, I saw that as the Adventist version of being a nun.
Wow.
It's a life of self-sacrifice, total commitment to the Lord. So for me, it was a big sacrifice. I had barely traveled outside of South Carolina when I went to Southern, which was in Tennessee, to go to college. So going to Africa was a bit like stepping off the edge of the earth. I had no idea what to expect. You know, I had these dreams of very remote places and difficult living circumstances. I really didn't know what to expect. But I had a desire to serve God with my life. I had a desire to make sacrifices for him because he has done so much in my life. God was a very personal friend to me. I had many instances where I knew that God had provided for my needs and that he had directed my pathway. So going to Africa was in many ways a dream come true for me. And so even though there were challenges, it was difficult to say goodbye to family and friends, I embraced it. And as my husband and I flew to Belgium on our second wedding anniversary, our minds were full of hopes and dreams for serving the Lord with our lives in Africa. My husband was British. He had moved to the States to go to Southern because Southern offered more than the Adventist school in England did. And when we met, he shared the same passion to serve God that I did.
Wow.
So we both looked forward to a lifetime of service in Africa.
So now you feet on the ground in Africa, I mean, all these hopes and dreams, and I would say as a counselor, on my end, idealistic at best. How do you just dive in there and start to get involved in what's called missions? I mean, what do you do? What did you do to get started there?
Yeah. Well, when we arrived in Bujumbura, I was 21 years old. I felt very young. The missionaries that we joined there were all grandparents. We were the youngest ones. I remember one Swiss missionary saying to me, "You're the youngest missionary I've ever met." And I really felt young because there was so much to learn. We had spent a month studying French, which wasn't very long. We had a lot to learn. And the first year was really hard. I have to admit that it was hard. The cultural differences just seemed huge. The separation from family and friends seemed really big. That first Christmas away from family was hard.
No snow, for example.
No snow. You know, a tropical Christmas. We had no Christmas decorations. I remember some other missionaries gave us a string of lights, and I put it on this banana plant to make it somewhat Christmas. So those kind of things were hard. But after the first year, I had learned to love it. I remember seeing the relationships with the people that we interacted with as my mission. I remember bargaining for about an hour one day to buy a bucket of lemons, and I did it all in French. And I was so pleased. I bargained with this guy, had a great time learning French. And afterwards, I showed my husband this 5-gallon bucket full of lemons and told him that I'd done the whole thing in French, and he laughed and said, "That's great. Did you forget that we have a lemon tree?" And I had. I'd forgotten that we had a lemon tree. But I loved learning to speak French. I remember learning Bible stories and teaching Sabbath school and having them translated into Kirundi. But I loved being involved with the church and with the children. So our time in Burundi was a beautiful time. We loved it there. We loved the people. We learned to love the environment. We got used to the heat and the market and things like that. In fact, I learned to really enjoy going to the market to buy food.
The market in Burundi?
Yes.
It's probably like the market in certain parts of Brooklyn. You know, just a lot of people, a lot of activity, a lot of things happening, like the flea market down in Miami.
Yeah.
Just all kind of interaction.
Yeah.
But the reason I wanted to talk about this particular part of your life is because you are very much American in a completely different culture.
Yeah.
And there is that point of no return where all of a sudden you say, okay, I'm here. Let me just get used to it.
Yeah.
After the 1 year point, you feel that that was where you kind of just said, well, we're here. Let's just make this home.
Yeah. Even though I wanted to the whole time, there was a very difficult transition period. And I have to say that my adult identity was shaped and formed in Africa. I was American, but I began to think and feel very African. And then after the 3 years and we were asked to move to Rwanda, that move was also a bit challenging because I loved Burundi and I didn't want to leave the people that we'd come to love there. But we moved to Rwanda, and instead of being in the capital city as we were in Burundi, we moved to the university site, which was an 8-hour drive on dirt roads away from the capital.
Wow.
And we thought we had some hardships in Burundi because there were times when the electricity would go off for weeks at a time and the water would go off every day, would only be on during the night. But in Rwanda, we didn't have electricity except by generator. The water was very dirty. There were times when you couldn't see the bottom of the bathtub. So we had other challenges there. Wow. We moved there when the university was under construction. We moved into the home of the university president, who was the first one there. He had a 2-bedroom home, and we moved there when our oldest son was 8 months old. We had had our first son while we were living in Burundi. We moved to Rwanda when he was 8 months old. We moved into their home with them. A couple weeks later, a third family moved into their 2-bedroom home. And so at that point, this third couple was also a couple from Southern that we had gone to school with. We moved out to the university site together into our very much unfinished home. So we had the unique privilege of being the first missionaries to move onto the campus of the Adventist University of Central Africa.
You know, I'm thinking of the living conditions for an infant, for a child, and that was being your first child, am I correct?
Yeah.
How did you handle that? Because I know in America, you know, when a mother has her first child, or family have their first child and they go to the hospital, you know, wash your hands, put on a mask, don't touch my baby, do you have a cold? You're in you're in a situation quite more adverse than that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not worrying about a cough, you're worrying about the color of the water.
Yeah.
How did that pan out for a missionary mom?
Well, I actually was not brave enough to have my first son in Africa.
Okay.
We planned his birth so that I was home. So he was born in the same city that I was born in South Carolina.
Okay, I got
But
it.
we went back to Africa when he was 1 month old.
Okay, so for all intents and purposes, yeah.
Yes, we went back when he was 1 month old. And there were those challenges. Giving him in a bath that the water wasn't clean, that was...
Mineral bath.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember when we moved into our home, there wasn't a place that was really safe to put him down, and he didn't walk until he was 18 months old.
Wow.
Because I carried him all the time.
Right, just because of the conditions you're in.
And I didn't realize that was abnormal because the African mothers carried their babies too. It was only later that I realized that babies walk much earlier than that.
Wow.
But he didn't have much opportunity to because there weren't too many places. Our home was still a construction site. But we managed. It was a challenge, and we embraced the challenge.
Now your husband is a British citizen.
Yeah.
How did he acclimate? What was he doing actually while he was there?
Well, he was the assistant business manager when we first moved there, but he was the chairman of the business department when the school opened. So the first 2 years we were involved simply in the building and the construction of the university. But after 2 years we were able to open the doors to students. That was in 1984. And the school opened. We had students from 15 different countries in Africa and the Indian Ocean that came to the school. And that was a privilege. He chaired the business department. We had a study leave to Andrews during that time where my husband got an MBA and a master's in information science. And I learned to love Rwanda. In fact, there were times when I felt like God had created and designed me to be a missionary in Africa. It fit who I was.
Wow. So Rwanda is now home for you and your husband and your new child. It was a son.
Yes.
And the school is still not completely finished, but you have quite an international contingency of students getting ready to come to school there.
Yeah. And not only was we were with our first son, we had a second and a third son there.
Wow.
And by that time, I was brave enough to have them in Africa. The second son was born in a little African hospital not far from our campus. And the third son was born in our home there at the university.
So they're African American?
They are African American. One of my sons recently, he had to fill out a census and he checked that he was African American.
See, so it's not a category that's necessarily skin color related,
No.
but really by nationality.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So here you are, things are getting off the ground, you're getting acclimated, you're steamrolling 3, 4, 5 years into, but somewhere along the way, a major trauma came to your family. Let's kind of fast forward to this particular turning point event in your life.
Well, you know, I had learned to love Rwanda so much. I loved the people, I loved the students there. It felt really fulfilling to be a part of something bigger than we were, to be a part of an institution that was training students that would take the gospel to the far corners of Africa and the Indian Ocean. And there were times that I felt like I couldn't be happier. I loved being a mother of 3 little boys. They were adorable, and I just loved it. And I remember talking with the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm willing to go anywhere, do anything, as long as my husband and our 3 little boys are together. And there were times when I felt like heaven couldn't be better than what I was experiencing. I didn't need streets of gold. The dirt roads were okay. But in reality, we're not in heaven yet. We may have a piece of heaven. The Adventist home says that a Christian home is like a bit of heaven, and I experienced that. But then in 1990, we made a decision to go and visit Victoria Falls. My mother-in-law had written and said that my husband's uncle was moving to Zambia. So we made the decision to take this trip, and it was a long trip, and travel in Africa during that time could be risky. Our good friends of ours also decided to go with us. They had 3 small children as well. So we made plans for this trip. And it was during the time of the General Conference in Indianapolis in 1990, and a number of missionaries planned their furloughs. At that time, we had furloughs every 3 years.
Okay.
They planned that so that they could attend the General Conference session. So quite a few people were away, and it was during the summer. And we prayed about it. My husband was acting as the business manager at that time, and we felt that God led us on the trip. We always prayed about things like that. And I remember saying to the Lord, if you don't want us to go, just let us know, because we don't want to step outside of your will in anything that we do. We went on the trip and we had a wonderful time. Traveling through Tanzania, the game parks in Tanzania are magnificent. The animals were wonderful, and with 3 little boys, it was once again like a bit of heaven.
That's true.
And we camped much of the time. Victoria Falls was fantastic. But the last day of our trip, we stopped at noon, and we could see the mountains of Rwanda. And we prayed and we thanked God for a safe and enjoyable trip. We were hurrying home. We'd traveled long that day. We'd gotten up early in the morning, and we're trying to make it to the border, the Rwanda-Tanzania border, because they closed at sundown. And we wanted to cross the border because inside Rwanda there was a newly paved road. The roads in Tanzania were paved, but they were not newly paved. They were more reinforced potholes. So we were looking forward to getting into Rwanda, and a half-hour's drive inside Rwanda, there was a hotel inside Rwanda's only game park. Now, I think it had 1 elephant that Tanzania gave to it. It wasn't a very big game park, but it had a nice hotel. And we were looking forward to sleeping in a bed that night and having a shower and spending the Sabbath there. I remember us reaching the border right at sundown. I can still see my husband's face coming out of the passport office with his passport, my passport, and our 3 sons' passports. He had a big smile on his face, and we were looking forward to resting well that night.
Wow.
My next memory, though, is awakening in a hospital bed in Brussels. I didn't know where I was or how I'd gotten there. I learned that our family had had a head-on collision with a truck and that my husband had been killed instantly.
This is a picture of that accident.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. My 3-year-old son, I learned, was 4 floors above me in the pediatrics unit. His skull was fractured, his leg was crushed, and 2 toes were missing. My 6-year-old and my 8-year-old sons were the only 2 family members at their father's funeral. When we had been camping in Tanzania on this trip, we would have worship with our 6 children. We'd put them to bed, and then we would sit around the campfire and share how God had led in our lives. And my husband and I had shared that if anything ever happened to us, that we wanted to be buried in Africa. That was the desire of both of us. We had no idea at that time that that would be useful information to our friends, but my husband was British, I was American. Where would we,
Right.
Africa was our home. So our friends knew that. And so before I regained consciousness at in the hospital in Belgium, they had already buried my husband in Rwanda.
Wow.
When I regained consciousness, it was overwhelming to me. I had always seen God as a loving, protective Heavenly Father who provided for my needs, who guided my footsteps, who had honored me with the privilege of serving Him in Africa. And it did not fit what had happened. So I was not only in an emotional crisis, I was also in a spiritual crisis.
Wow.
The 2 weeks that I spent in the hospital in Belgium were the worst 2 weeks in my life. I wrestled with, God, where are you? Why did you let this happen? It didn't make sense. I knew missionaries who didn't like being missionaries, who didn't enjoy the market and the difficulties and the challenges of living in a very impoverished third world country.
Right.
But I loved it. And why couldn't I be there? I longed to go back to Africa, but I knew that Africa didn't need a widow with 3 young children. They needed my husband, and they would need my house for the next missionary that would take his place. So I struggled with the Lord. After 2 weeks in Belgium, we were transferred to a hospital in South Carolina. But let me back up just a bit. I said I didn't think I knew anyone in Belgium. There was a missionary in Rwanda that was from Belgium. He contacted his church, and every day someone from his church there in Brussels came to visit my son and me. The president of the Belgian conference and his wife came and visited every day. They ministered, they represented Christ to me. I felt abandoned by God, but God had not abandoned me. He was there in the person of these individuals who came and cared for us. When we were transferred to South Carolina, we spent 2 more weeks in the hospital there. And a huge issue for me was, where will I live?
Wow.
You know, we had flown to Belgium on our 2nd wedding anniversary. I was in Belgium again on our 13th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
When we went to Belgium, our hearts were full of dreams and plans for our future. On our 13th, my dreams had been shattered. Instead of hope, I was filled with despair. I didn't know what God had in mind for me. I didn't know if I could trust God.
Wow. And that's, you know, that's a traumatic intersection to be at, because you mentioned that even you couldn't even go to the funeral.
No.
You know, you were able to, a while after that, I think we have a picture of you by the graveside.
Yeah, it was actually a year later, when I was strong enough to take care of myself and my boys and able to make the trip back to Africa to say goodbye to our lives there and get our belongings.
Right.
War had broken out in Rwanda.
Right.
So it was a whole year later before I was able to go back to Rwanda to see my husband's grave for the first time.
Wow.
And to say goodbye to our lives there.
I think you have a graphic of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, of you standing, that's where he was buried, right there.
Yeah.
In Rwanda, and
that was a year after he was buried, and it was the first time that I saw his funeral.
And you're accompanied by some of the people there?
Yeah, these were workers there. When I first went to the grave, I wanted to go by myself, without my son, so without anyone else. I just wanted time by myself by the grave. But when I got there, these men were all there working, and they just stepped back and let me grieve. And then after I'd spent some time alone with the grave, I looked up at them, and they all surrounded me and wept with me, which was very, very healing. Because part of the challenge of coming back to the States after a traumatic event like this is, even though I was American, I no longer felt American.
Wow.
And I no longer had a support system in the States. I was 21 when we left the States. I was 32 when I came back as a widow with 3 little boys. I didn't know how to live in America. I had a degree in elementary education from Southern, but I hadn't bothered getting certification because I was going to Africa. So I would have to go back to get certified. I wasn't in a position to work at that time. I just really struggled with, Lord, how will I live in the States? What will I do? After going back to Africa and seeing my husband's grave, I was able to say goodbye to our life there, and was in a position then to allow God to begin to rebuild my life in the States.
Wow. And the rebuilding was an amazing rebuilding, because here you are at an intersection in reality. Closing one door, which in fact emotionally as a psychologist, you know, that there are indelible strings connected to that past that will never be severed. But then you get to the point where at that same intersection, you have to say, well, I have to continue to live.
Yeah.
And there were certain strides. You made some tremendous strides. You went back to school.
I did.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I moved to Andrews, and there's a whole long story of how I moved to Andrews and how God led in that. But I moved to Andrews, and I began to take psychology courses. And as I mentioned earlier, when I first went to Southern, I had interest in becoming a psychiatrist. At that time, I actually didn't know the difference between psychology and psychiatry.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, what's the difference?
Well, a psychiatrist has a medical degree, becomes
Okay.
a medical doctor, and a psychologist doesn't have that, and they learn how the mind works.
Okay,
Yeah, and they treat using psychotherapy, not medications.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to help the mind heal. See, I believe that God created the mind to heal itself just as much as He created the body to heal. And if you get a cut, the doctor may clean the wound and stitch it up, but the body heals, and God works through the body to heal itself. And a psychologist may help clean the wounds and may help stitch it up, but God has created us to heal. And so I wanted to be a part of that process.
Wow.
So
A very nurturing aspect of life also. So here you are on the frontier of starting over.
Yeah.
You got your degree in psychology, but then also you added another degree. Tell me what that was.
I did a Doctor of Ministry degree later, but when I did the psychology degree, I think you asked me too about my remarriage.
Yes.
Yes. I began working on the degree in psychology, and then, my goal was to find a new mission in life, and God put a new mission in my heart, in the lives and hearts of people who are hurting, because that is a mission field.
That's right.
But I do want to share one little bit that I forgot to tell you about. A few months after my husband was killed, my oldest son came to me and he said, "Mommy, do you think you could find a really nice man and marry him so I could have a daddy again?"
Wow.
And that just pierced my heart, because more than anything, I wanted my sons to have their father. And how do you go about finding a daddy for your children, And I didn't know what to say. And before I could say anything, he said, "I know, Mom, that would be really hard to do. It would be really hard to ever find a man as nice as my daddy. But it's not too hard for God."
That's right.
When we first moved to Andrews, I made an appointment I tried to make an appointment at the medical center there to see the doctor. And my sons and I all still needed quite a bit of medical care. And the receptionist said the doctor's not taking new patients. So I asked, she asked my name for some reason. I told her, and she happened to be the sister of a missionary in Rwanda. And she said, "I know who you are. I'm sure the doctor will want to see you." In any case, we made an appointment with that doctor, and 5 years later, we married.
Wow. So the Lord did find,
He did.
as nothing is impossible for God, did find a wonderful man to take the role of being the dad, and also your husband.
Yes, that's
How
right.
healing was that?
Incredibly so, because the thing that really touched my heart was the Christ-like, tender and gentle way that he interacted with my sons. That just really won my heart. And in fact, our first date, he asked to take my boys and me to an air show, because he understood the needs of 3 little boys, and that was an incredible blessing to me.
Wow.
I did my first dissertation on marital satisfaction in remarried families. My husband was a single father of 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, and I had 3 sons. So we blended our 7 children into a family of 9.
That's a blessing.
Yeah.
So you have a healthy family today.
Yes.
And both of you are still involved in missions?
Yeah. My husband actually is no longer a practicing physician. He's the hospital president of Lakeland Healthcare in southwestern Michigan, the
Okay.
hospital system there. But he is very, very supportive of my work with missionaries. And I'll just back up a bit. After I finished my degree, I began working with Adventist Frontier Missions, providing mental health care for their missionaries, and with the General Conference, doing missionary care for their missionaries in crisis intervention. So that's what I do today. I'm almost full-time with the General Conference now. I have a very, very small practice in Berrien Springs. And I live in Berrien Springs because most of my work is traveling to where missionaries are.
Now talk about that for a moment, because we talked about the traumas of going to the mission field, but then there are traumas coming from the mission field.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what you deal with today, helping people reacclimate. Give me some idea of some of these situations you deal with, because there are people in the field that, for example, you lost your husband in a terrible accident in Africa, but then there are other traumas that happen. you cited some stories like, for example, Bob Roberts.
Yes.
Talked about that.
Yeah, Bob and Jan Roberts were missionaries in Congo when we were missionaries in Rwanda, so we knew them in Africa. And after we left Rwanda, they moved to Papua, Indonesia. And so when Bob was killed in the plane crash, I was asked by the General Conference to go and help support the family and that community, because they'd been there for 22 years. So it was a privilege and an honor for me to be able to support that community.
You know, these traumas that we talk about, when you think of the ministry aspects of it, I'm tying it back to your beginnings, because you mentioned your dad was Catholic, your mom was Adventist, and you said, Lord, I need to find my own identity. But even from that mix, you thought, well, there are no Adventist nuns, but the ministry of compassion is something that was planted in your heart from young, and you still continue to this very day. But now, we mentioned your need as a mom, but talk about some of these missionary children, their needs when they, something in the war, you know, POWs, we talk about that. There should be one, POMs, you know, prison is it's not the word.
We call them MKs, missionary kids.
Okay.
And that's where my greatest passion lies, because in coming back to the States, I was coming back home. You know, I was American. I didn't really feel American, but I was American. My children were more or less African. They had never lived here. Their identity wasn't, you know, I remember them going to school and say, why do we need to say the Pledge of Allegiance? We're not American. I had to explain, yes, you are American.
Wow.
So coming back for them was very hard. It wasn't coming back. It was a new place for them. Also, you know, Ellen White says that we have no need to fear for the future unless we forget how God has led us in the past. And we often forget that children don't have that past to draw on.
That's true.
So their faith is often very much challenged. And my plea is for the church to embrace missionary children, especially missionary children who have experienced trauma. Often they feel abandoned. I felt abandoned by God, but I was a mature adult with a very strong relationship with the Lord. Children don't have that, and they feel abandoned by God and by the church when tough things happen, and they need the church to embrace them, to support them during difficult times. And all missionaries, when they come back, struggle with coming back to their home culture. Who they are is changed by their experiences.
And so your sons, are any of them in the mission field today, or are they all back in America? Or I should say in America, not back in America, because as you said, your sons were raised in the mission field, and to come to America. That was a very interesting thought, to be an American, that is by association, by family origin.
By birth, passport.
By passport, and then you think Pledge of Allegiance, but this is not my country.
Right.
That is, help me grasp that. How did they transition?
Well, they gradually adopted America, but in their core, they have many African values, many missionary kid values. They're considered third culture kids because they're this blend of American and African. And so the General Conference does a reentry seminar for returning missionaries every year, and for the teenagers and young adults who are coming back to the States to go to school, many whose parents are still in the mission field. It's a tough transition. Wow.
You know, just before we go, I want to give the address roll right now for those who are watching the program, so they could know if you want to find out more about missions and how the General Conference plays a role in the world field of missions. Here's the address information that you would need.
If you would like to contact Dr. Ann Hamel, you can do so by writing to Dr. Ann Hamel, 9045 US 31, Berrien Springs, Michigan 49103. That's Dr. Ann Hamel, 9045 US 31, Berrien Springs, Michigan 49103. You can call 269-473-2223. That's 269-473-2223. You can also reach her at drannhamel@gmail.com. That's drannhamel@gmail.com.
You know, Dr. Hamel, I called you Ann earlier.
Right.
But I use Dr. Hamel for a particular reason now. With psychology and also a degree in ministry, now you are in a place where you are continuing to minister to people that are still connected to missions. Tell me about your approach to missions. Because my approach to missions would be, get your bags packed, head to the mission field. What's your approach to missions dealing with people that are going and coming back?
Well, I think when you're dealing with missionaries, you're very much dealing with spiritual issues. The church has always been involved in missions because it's Christ's great commission to go into all the world.
That's right.
And in Acts, it says that Ananias was to go and anoint Paul because he was God's chosen vessel to carry the gospel to the Gentiles. But then it goes on to say that I will show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake. The call of a missionary has always been a call of self-sacrifice and suffering. You know, a third of the countries in the world have very limited or no religious freedom. And 70% of the people in the world live in those countries. It's also true that there's never been a time when the gospel has gone to a new people group where it wasn't met with resistance and that it wasn't costly to the messengers and to the new people who received the gospel.
Wow.
So hardship and trials and trauma is a part of mission service. So, you know, I got the degree in psychology because I wanted to help missionaries deal with difficult experiences that they were dealing with. It wasn't long after working with missionaries that I realized that we are involved in a great controversy, and there are spiritual issues very much a part of any issues that missionaries deal with. So I went back to school and got a Doctor of Ministry degree. So I always take a dual approach. I look at the psychological aspects of it, but I also look at the spiritual aspects of any challenge that a missionary is facing. And Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation.
That's right.
But he says, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. 1 Peter 4:7 says that we're not to be surprised at the painful trials that we suffer, as if some strange thing has happened to us, but that we're to rejoice because we're able to participate in the sufferings of Christ. We have incredibly good news to share with the world.
That's right.
No matter what we experience. Whether you're a missionary or whether you stay here, we all have a cross to bear. Jesus invites us to take up our cross and to follow him.
Now, your husband and you together now, how has he gotten on board with your approach to missions?
Yeah, my husband is a gift of God to me and to our family. He's no longer a practicing physician. He's a hospital president, and he supports me in my travels and the work that I do. And one thing that attracted me to him is he was actually born in the hospital that he's the president of.
Wow.
He didn't have to go far away to be a missionary. He considers his work as a mission, that we are to represent Christ in all that we do. In whatever role we have, we don't have to go far away.
That is
We're
wonderful.
to serve the Lord wherever we are and to represent him to those around us.
Now, have any of your children thought about becoming missionaries, or have they gone back to Africa since they've left?
No, we actually took all the children back in 2008 to see my husband's grave for the first time after 17 years. We took all 7 of our children in 98, but Rwanda was not stable enough at that time. But in 2008, we took my 3 sons and their wives, and we went back. And that was the first time after 17 years. And it was a difficult but very healing time. For my sons, it's been hard for them. Yeah, it's hard to understand how an all-powerful and all-loving God can allow such terrible things to happen, because it's not just in our lives. It happened in the country that we loved.
Wow.
The genocide in Rwanda ravaged that country. The General Conference built the university in Rwanda because at that time Rwanda was considered the most peaceful and stable country in Africa. So in many ways it parallels my life. You know, I felt like I couldn't be happier. Rwanda was a peaceful and stable country, but the enemy is attacked.
Wow,
But God has redeemed that.
And you know, the beauty of missions is that the Lord always comes out ahead. He always comes out victorious in whatever situation we're in.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing how quickly our time goes, but our viewing and listening audience knows that this is a time for our short news break, and then we'll be back with a few closing comments to our program. Well, friends, as you know, our time just flies by almost imperceptibly, but we have been touched and inspired by some wonderful stories today, but there's a good ending to the Rwanda story. Dr. Hamel, tell us about Rwanda, what happened over there. Many of us are aware of the genocide and the war that ensued after that, but what's the good news about Rwanda today?
Rwanda is very much a Christian country, and God is healing Rwanda. Just recently, they baptized close to 100,000 new members in Rwanda.
Wow, that's huge.
Yes, and that country is very peaceful and very stable again today. So we serve a God who is fully able to heal and redeem that which the devil seeks to destroy.
And the story of missions, in a nutshell, is sharing God's good news through His grace.
That's right.
Wow.
He invites us to take up our cross because we all have one.
That's
and
right.
to follow Him because there's good news as we follow Him.
And you know, after the cross is the crown.
That's right.
But thank you so much for being here today. We surely appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And we are praying for God's blessings to continue in your life as you go forth in the power and the grace and strength of the Lord. You know, friends, there's a mission for you. You might be in Brooklyn, you might be in California, wherever you might be overseas. We pray that the Lord will impress your heart to work with Him in preparation for His soon return. God bless you until we see you again.